What's up, Navigating Academia family? I hope you guys are having a wonderful night so far. I want to make this little live for you guys this week. I haven't posted anything in a little bit over a week, so I kind of get bummed when I don't have a chance to be able to talk to you guys for a while. So even though it's been an incredibly busy week, I wanted to be sure to be able to make this video for you. Now, this is a video that a few people have asked me questions about and asked me to be able to make over the last several months. And I think a big reason for it is that it's about to be summertime. So right now it is the beginning of June. And a lot of people are starting to think about graduate school applications for the forthcoming fall. Some people have watched other videos on this channel, and they know that it's incredibly important to be able to choose a graduate school supervisor as soon as you can and to be able to select kind of a small subset of graduate school programs that you want to apply to. So again, I know that they're in different fields, it's different, right? So for me, I'm a clinical psychologist. And so because of that, to be able to talk about clinical psych for a moment, really you should plan on applying to no more than 3 to 5 programs if you want to do a clinical psychology PhD program. Now, apparently there's some guidance out there there's some book apparently that people read that you can buy on Amazon. It's got like a self-published book that says you should apply to like 10 to 20 programs. If you watch other videos on this channel, you know that that's not a great idea, simply because the amount of time that you need to spend on actually building personal connections and really getting to know the target program is exceptionally high. And so because of that, it's not a great idea to apply to so many. So what can you do to be able to try your absolute best to be able to max out your chances of picking the right supervisor? And yeah, there are other videos on the channel already about how to approach potential graduate school supervisors. And there are also videos on essentially how to be able to pick one. But we really haven't talked so much on the channel at this time about what makes a good, quote unquote, a good graduate school supervisor. And so because of that, I figured that I would make you guys a video about that today. And our little mascot, Ochin, is joining us. Everybody say hi to Ochin. So the idea for today is to be able to go through all of that in approximately a half an hour is kind of what I'm planning so far. And then I want to get to some Q&A to be able to answer your guys' valued questions. So if you have questions, be sure to be able to put them in the chat. The chat for me is right over here. So I'm taking a look at it and being sure to monitor it. So if you guys have questions that you would like me to answer, obviously be sure to hang out so that we can talk to each other. I always love hearing from you guys. And please do smash that like button. It helps us to be able to get this live stream out to even more people. I appreciate it. That's the thumbs up button. Okay, so let's get down to it. To be able to talk, guys, about what makes a good graduate school supervisor, it's also important to talk about what makes a good undergraduate supervisor. And the reason is that the roles that a supervisor plays in undergraduate versus graduate school versus doing, let's say, a postdoctoral fellowship versus maybe more of a mentor when you're a junior academic, the roles are very distinct, right? So the roles are very different. And if you have questions about selecting an undergraduate supervisor, obviously you can ask me more about that in the chat as well, in case you're not yet at that point to be able to be thinking too much about grad school. You want to think more about undergrad, more than fair enough, okay? So let's go ahead and talk about being an undergraduate supervisor first, right? So when it comes to choosing an undergraduate supervisor, what makes a good undergraduate supervisor? More than anything, you need to think about somebody who's going to essentially direct you through your undergraduate years to be able to get into graduate school or to be able to launch you into the career path of your choosing. So let's say, for example, as an undergraduate, you do chemical engineering. And let's say when you're done with that chemical engineering degree, instead of going and getting a master's or a doctoral degree in any kind of engineering you like, including chemical engineering, then it's something where, okay, in terms of the job market, etc., that supervisor should be helping you navigate that to be able to get your resume or your CV ready, to be able to make connections for you in the actual work world, to be able to tell you a little bit about things like writing cover letters. How do you actually find these types of jobs? This is something that's very important. But for the most part, what I would say the most important role of a supervisor for somebody who's supervising undergraduates is to be able to fundamentally understand the role of that kind of a supervisor. And the role is, if nothing else, to understand that developmentally speaking, so we're talking about just neurology right now, like Neurology 101, and what we understand now about developmental psychology and cognitive neuroscience of kiddos, is that, after we get out of high school, usually all of us, certainly myself, I can tell you that, we all kind of self-classify as adults in the United States. Being 18 is, the legal age of being an adult in most states. A little bit younger in other states. But the big idea here is that when you kind of get out of high school, we think we're adults. When in actuality, we're not launched usually right into the real world. We're launched into university. And your university years as an undergraduate are going to be very special, and I hope for you very wonderful years of your life. I want you to think about it kind of like getting into a pool. Daria and I were at a resort down in Dominican Republic a number of months ago. You guys may remember I did some lives and all from there. So essentially in that kind of a pool, right, it's not like just straight into the deep end, right? There's kind of this graded level of the pool where you're kind of walking outside, then you get in here, and we're slowly but surely walking into the pool proper. Okay. And that's what undergraduate is. It essentially is, doing this process of ushering you into adulthood. We call this emerging adulthood. So it's kind of beyond the teenage years. It's beyond adolescence. And remember that being a teenager and this concept of adolescence honestly is like very much a 20th century invention. Back in the 1800s, 1700s, and beforehand, we really didn't have that. You literally went from kind of being a child to being an adult. There was not this kind of this decalage period where you essentially went from one to the other. That wasn't really a thing. Versus now, it would be so weird to say that it's like, I don't believe in being a teenager, or I don't believe in adolescence. That's like a crazy thing to be able to suggest, right? And now it's becoming more and more normal to talk about this period of emerging adulthood, right? Awesome. Charles has a question here. Charles says, does your institution's assistantship stack on a Fulbright? 2 salaries. That's a good question, Charles. So it depends. Are you talking about graduate school or postdoc? So you can go ahead and tell me. I'll finish this monologue first, and I'll get to that. Okay. So here's the idea here, right? Is that we're going into emerging adulthood. When you're a teenager, usually what happens is that you're in a state of what we call personality moratorium or identity moratorium. The idea behind identity moratorium is that you basically don't have to decide, quote unquote, who you are. Now, what do I mean by that, right? So let's say that, you're in high school. So for me, like, I was total nerd. I was part of the It's Academic group, which was like Quiz Bowl. I freaking loved Quiz Bowl. If anybody else was in Quiz Bowl, God bless. District Champs 2004. Yeah. So suck it. 2004, baby. That's what I'm talking about. We were great. We got to be on TV and the whole thing. That's pretty cool when you're like, 17 years old, right? But in any case, right, being a nerd or whatever, you kind of think about, what are the things that nerds do, right? So it's like, okay, so I joined Quiz Bowl and I was on the honor roll every single year, and I was the valedictorian when I was in high school, and, I did a lot of tutoring and this kind of stuff. It was kind of a preset identity that I was able to slide into. And think about everybody, right? Think about jocks. I have a lot of friends who are skateboarders, right? Still skateboarders. So it's like kind of skateboard culture. There are all of these different little cultures that you can kind of fit into, right? And so that's the idea here, is that if you're going to fit into these different cultures, essentially what you end up finding yourself in is a state of what we call a patchwork self, where you're taking a bit of this identity, a bit of that identity, and you're making it into almost a quilt, like a patchwork of an identity, of a self. And instead of that allowing ourselves to be able to kind of fully grow into who we are, instead we end up having literally this patchwork self. Okay. And so essentially we're in that state of identity moratorium. College gives you an opportunity to kind of figure out who you are. If you're a fan of somebody like Gary V, Marinette says that she does Quiz Bowl too. It's amazing, right? Come on, it's great, right? I freaking loved it. So if anybody's never done Quiz Bowl, you should go to like one meeting. It's actually quite a bit of fun. But the idea here is that undergrad gives you an opportunity to try out so many things. If you're a fan of Gary V, if anybody knows who Gary Vaynerchuk is, right? So Gary V is the man. I'm a big fan. I think he curses too much, but other than that, God bless him. And so the thing about Gary V is that, he always talks about how the reason why most people don't know what they're passionate about is that they haven't tried enough things. And undergrad gives you an opportunity to try out a whole bunch of things. And if you're an undergraduate supervisor, you need to understand the unique role that undergraduate studies plays in a human being's life. All right. You need to understand more than anything that you're going to be dealing with a lot of different typologies of student. Now, what do I mean by that? There's a typology of student who essentially they like, for me, like I've told you guys on the channel before, right? Like I knew what I wanted to do, and I was looking for graduate schools 1 week before I actually moved up to Boston. right? To be able to go to Tufts for my undergraduate years. Great school, right? So that's the idea here, is that you're going to have people like that who we've always known what we wanted to do, and we work our way through undergraduate knowing exactly what the goal is to go to grad school into one of these top programs. We need your help, undergraduate supervisors, to be able to figure out what are the best kind of universities that will provide me with the type of education that I desire, and so forth. It is absolutely critical. And so also, though, they need to understand in terms of typologies that you're going to have a group of individuals who maybe the first 2 years of undergrad, they don't quite know what they want to do or where they want to be, or they came into undergraduate. Most of the time, what I see is people wanting to be medical doctors. And they get into undergrad and they say, I want to be a medical doctor. I want to be, let's say, a psychiatrist. And then all of a sudden they take, orgo, they take organic chemistry, or they take, bio or chem or one of these classes, and they either usually they get really bad grades, or what they perceive to be really bad grades, like C's, D's, F's here in the US system. And then they say, okay, like that's not really what I want to do anymore. And then they discover a new field. And usually they don't realize that by that time they're really behind. And that can be really scary for them because, of course, in their life story where they're the protagonist, it's like, okay, great. Like now I know what I want to do. Now I'm ready. But the thing is that you have the other typology of students who they've always known what they want to do. And they've been, straight A students from the beginning. And all of a sudden, these folks who junior or senior year decide what they want to do, even though they're the protagonists of their own stories, they have to compete against the other folks. Right. And that can be really scary for them. So these undergrad supervisors need to understand that, again, your identity is still developing and you may want to switch career fields. It may be something where, God forbid, something really intense happens in your family where, your grades end up tanking, or, you have a falling out with, a lab director. All of a sudden, this person who you always thought would write you a letter of recommendation for your future job or for grad school falls out. They need to be able to help you to kind of navigate that process, right? And it is really more of like an aunt or an uncle role. That's what I always think of it as, being very understanding and also recognizing that as people kind of come out of this patchwork self, out of that kind of sense of identity moratorium, some people handle it really well and other people kind of go to an extreme. This could be going to an extreme, for example, of being like, what, I'm like super adult now. Now I'm going to be super tough and I'm going to do all the adult things, right? I'm going to go out, I'm going to get wasted every single weekend. I'm going to go to house parties, 5 days a week. I'm going to go and, have as much sex as I can. I'm going to go and do any of these really extreme things. Other people go to the other extreme and they say, I don't want to be a part of any of this secular worldly stuff. I just know I want to go to grad school. And so I'm going to study, and I'm never going to socialize, never going to go out. And then you don't build up that side of your character. And the role of an undergraduate is to be able to, more than anything else, guide you through not only the undergraduate years, but your own personality development, okay? So that's what I would say for being an undergraduate, because the goal of the undergraduate years is to provide you with the fundamentals of your education. It's not designed to be able to provide you any level of mastery for pretty much anything at the end of the day, even though maybe you take some advanced courses or even some grad level courses as an undergraduate. I did that my last year of undergraduate, and very challenging, very fulfilling at the same time. But then all of a sudden you get into graduate school, right? And all of a sudden the role of a grad school supervisor is completely different, because all of a sudden it went from kind of, training people who, who knows if this is the field they would want to go into, to all of a sudden a group of individuals who they've basically said, this is what I want to devote my life to. This is what I really want to focus on. And all of a sudden, you're trying to make them literally thought leaders in the area and rising stars in the field. You need to give them opportunities to publish in peer-reviewed journals, to teach them how to be able to publish, to teach them how to be able to write conference abstracts so that they can present posters or papers or develop conference symposia. They need to give you opportunities to be able to network with the individuals in their desired little niche of the field. So like in forensic psychology, we've got folks in eyewitness testimony, folks in mental state evaluation, folks in risk assessment, folks in sex offender treatment. All of these little kind of niche fields that are all subsumed by this umbrella term of forensic psychology. A lot of people, ironically, during undergrad, we think that something like I want to be a forensic psychologist is just super niche, but it is not niche at all. And so that's a kind of a funny thing that you learn a lot more of in graduate school. So anyway, just something that's very important to take into consideration is that you need somebody who can teach you all of these things. Preferably if you're planning on staying in the country where you're doing your graduate degree. So for example, I always knew I want to be back in the States, but I ended up doing grad school. In terms of my first doctorate, I did at Oxford, so I was over in the UK, right? And so it was one of these things where learning about things like funding mechanisms, like grant funding mechanisms. I wouldn't be able to learn about, NIH fellowships. I wouldn't be able to learn about things like, like K mechanisms and this kind of stuff. Anybody knows what that is? I wouldn't have been able to learn about any of that kind of stuff. But if you're a grad school supervisor and you have a student who wants to stay in that country, it's really important that they, really give you exposure to that kind of information. Next thing I'm going to say, but first, guys, do me a favor. Wonderful to be able to see everybody who's coming out. Everybody, do me a favor before you leave today. Just smash the like button because it means that we get more visibility in people's feeds for this particular live stream. And that means that all of us are going to benefit because it means that we'll end up getting more great questions asked. Excellent. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. On top of all of this, though, right, in terms of the role of a graduate school supervisor, in my opinion, is to be able to understand that if they do their job correctly, the vulnerability to clinical depression and anxiety disorders will skyrocket. Now, why do I say that? Is it to make you afraid? Of course it's not, right? But please understand when I talk to, and I do this, right, in terms of giving lectures to professors who are going to be supervisors, grad school supervisors, right? Here's how I explain it to them. So what I say is that you can define self-esteem essentially as being like a formula. And this formula is a little something like this, right? It's basically your ideal self minus your perceived self. How do you want to be versus how do you perceive that you are kind of in the moment? The larger the gap between these two things, the lower the self-esteem. I remember, guys, when I got into Oxford and not only did I freak out, but my grandparents freaked out, my parents freaked out. Everybody freaked out, right? My friends took me out to this, big dinner, my favorite restaurant. I mean, it was this big thing. And the cool thing, of course, is that, even though you just got in, people being like, hey, future Dr. Singh and this kind of stuff, right? And that can be so exciting. And we kind of have this abyss that we're entering into in terms of grad school. But hey, I had a 3.96 GPA as an undergraduate. I was like, I rocked that thing. I'm going to rock grad school too. I don't know exactly what's expected, but you know what? I think I'm going to kick some butt because I was, the guy who won all these different awards as an undergrad. I'm going to rock this thing. That legitimately is what I thought. Now, there was a little bit of a problem with this, right? Insofar as I went to graduate school, and I still remember my first week and kind of doing orientation, matriculation, this kind of stuff to Oxford. And it was kind of made abundantly clear to me as the months went on and during that time period when we were onboarded as cohort that we basically were not only not at the end of our journey, we were at the very, very beginning of it, right? And all of a sudden, all of these kinds of career milestones were presented to me that I'm going to finish grad school and then probably do a postdoc and then get a tenure track position, God willing. Really hard these days. 80% of all new faculty positions, not tenure track, right? After that, right, I got to get tenure, right? And during this whole process, I got to be getting a ton of publications and a ton of grant funding and presenting a ton of conferences and you can see whatever, my hand is getting further and further out here. And as that happens, even though I didn't change, right? That's the thing people misunderstand. A lot of people get into grad school and they think, oh my gosh, I'm going to have this terrible supervisor. And even though this is kind of like my ideal self, my perceived self is going to get pushed back because I'm going to get bullied and all these terrible things are going to happen to me. And all of a sudden I'm going to get depressed and anxious. That if you have a good supervisor, that is not what's going to happen, right? But what's more likely to happen is that as they're guiding you and telling you about all the amazing opportunities that you're going to have in your career, this ends up going out and out and out and out. This space gets so much larger. And because of that, there can be this feeling of helplessness or even hopelessness in some cases, because the things that you're teaching graduate students can be really, as a grad school supervisor, can be really, really challenging to be able to teach advanced statistical analytic techniques, I built for you guys Publication Academy, right, which you haven't checked out. So it's www.publicationacademy.com. Publication Academy essentially is the largest online platform that teaches you how to publish in peer-reviewed journals, right? So be sure to check it out. Again, I'll just put it in the chat here, whatever, just so that it's on here for anybody who's watching this afterwards, publicationacademy.com. So here's the idea, right, is that skills like this are exceptionally complicated and exceptionally difficult to develop. And so because of that, trying to train grad school students with no experience in those areas how to do it can be super duper challenging and frustrating for the supervisor to the point where they just think, you know what, this is going to be so much easier if I frankly take their paper and just make all the modifications. I'll choose the journal. I'll tell them the statistical analytic techniques. I'll tell them how to be able to, kind of navigate everything, and then they'll just do it. But as a supervisor, that actually is not the role. Your role, more than anything else, if you are a graduate school supervisor, is more than anything else. You're welcome, Portia, right? Your task more than anything else is to be able to take that time to walk that very thin tightrope between giving too much guidance and not enough guidance, right? And make sure that your students have learned how to learn, and I hate that saying, but learned how to learn by the time that they actually get out of graduate school. But that process is going to break a lot of people down. Broke me down for sure. And the reason it breaks people down is a lot of people who got into grad school, especially clinical psych programs, where this past year the acceptance rates were between 0.5% to 2%. That's crazy. And usually it hovers around 4%. But at the end of the day, for people like this who had to be so exceptional as undergraduates just to get into grad school, the idea that they get into grad school and then there's things they can't do or that they genuinely struggle with, that is very challenging for them to deal with. And psychologically, it takes a genuine toll. So you just as a grad school supervisor need to understand that. And no, of course, your role is to not be their therapist or anything like this. Obviously, if they need a therapist, make sure that they see somebody who's a licensed clinician who usually is going to be within kind of the university's healthcare system or, on-campus counseling. These things really, try to promote that. Therapy is a good thing, right? Everybody should be in therapy. I'm a huge believer in that if you've watched kind of other videos on the channel. Excellent. Guys, welcome to everybody who just joined us. Do me a favor, smash that like button, the thumbs up button. Really appreciate it. Make sure that we get even more people here on the live stream so that I can answer your guys' great questions. So that is the key in terms of graduate school supervision, okay? Now, when you're looking for a grad school supervisor, obviously there's a number of key things to look for. The number one thing is your goodness of fit with them. And I don't just mean academically, I mean at a personal level. If you guys are starting to get an idea of who your target graduate school supervisor is going to be, and maybe this is somebody who's like a rising star, they're super young, and you're a little bit nervous because they're really young, but at the same time, they're doing super cool, groundbreaking research. You need to understand that sometimes those folks are amazing, right? And sometimes, they're so junior that either they see you as competition because they're so young, or like I got my first doctorate when I was 24, right? And so, I could be younger than some of my, grad students by the time I became a professor, tenure track professor. That can be really intimidating for somebody like myself in that case. But it's important that you, of course, not get intimidated by stuff like that if you're the grad school supervisor. And if you're the person who's going to be applying, you just need to understand that it's possible that they're not going to be great supervisors because they haven't supervised a lot of people yet. But in some cases, they're great. Then you've got folks who are the super OG people, right? Like truly, truly legendary in your field. Now, the good thing is that everybody knows those people. So you're going to get a lot of notoriety in terms of people say, oh, you're at University of Washington. Who's your supervisor? And you say, Marsha Linehan. And this is a person in my field with a big name. And people are like, oh, God, Marsha, she's amazing, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's great. That's a really, really good thing because it's, people automatically know. It's like proof of concept. You're already socially proofed, right? And that's great. What's the problem with that? The likelihood you're going to see that really OG famous person, let alone have like a really personal relationship with them, is exceptionally small. Usually it is the postdocs or even collaborators, like junior collaborators at the same university in the same department oftentimes, who are going to be doing most of the active supervision of you while this really huge name person is being a huge name person. They've got to apply for grant funding. They've got to fly around, going to different conferences, giving keynotes, et cetera, and they need graduate students who are going to help support their research agenda and help to be able to conduct the research that they've that they're getting ongoingly funding for, right? That sustainable funding is kind of what their goal is, because the more funding they get, the more money that they make. Right. And let's put it this way, right? Academia is just like anything else. If you follow the money, oftentimes you end up learning a lot. Right. So that's the key thing to understand about kind of more of these like OG folks, right? These like, original, the really big name people kind of in your field. My recommendation is, number one, as I always tell you guys, right? The three things that you need to establish in terms of goodness of fit is a methodology, a particular population, and some sort of a clinical phenomenon or a practical phenomenon, because you may not be in a clinical field, right? You may be in something like, engineering, where you're doing work with lasers, which is super cool. Had a number of colleagues who ended up getting their doctorates and different laser related things, which I'm sure the 5-year-old version of myself would be like, yes, that is what I wanted to do. When in actuality, the 5-year-old version of myself actually deeply wanted to be a waiter at a local Mexican restaurant called Chi-Chi's. And which was owned by a Washington Redskin, which is an American football team, right? And this was my place. Everybody was so nice. I used to get virgin pina coladas, and they had amazing French fries. For a little chubby kid like myself, freaking living the dream over here at Chi-Chi's, okay, in my head. No joke. I used to walk around with little, like, my hands weren't big enough to support like a big plate. So I used to walk around with little like teacup saucers. That's a true story, right? So that's who you're talking to right now. And I'm sure that you guys have had kind of similar stories in terms of your evolution with your career stories. Never be afraid or embarrassed to tell those things. They're kind of fun, right? Really makes you a human being. In terms of choosing a grad school supervisor, Portia knows Chi-Chi's. What's up? Amazing. Unfortunately out of business now. What are you going to do, darn it? But the idea is that I want you guys to always go to YouTube or take a look at kind of podcasts, etc., and try to find the individuals that you're thinking about working with, and take a look at them on YouTube or on podcasts. Why? Because their personality could be completely different than their photo. Maybe they're super in their photo. Their departmental photo, they look super stiff and stern, when in actuality, they're like a teddy bear, right? Or it could be the case, or like if you guys have looked me up on LinkedIn, I've got a super serious face. You guys know me, I'm a teddy bear, right? Or it could be the opposite, where the person looks like a teddy bear and they're freaking like a vicious bear that's going to rip your face off, right? And the best way to know that is literally by watching 5 minutes or even scrolling through or watching the whole thing of a YouTube video or a podcast to be able to see these individuals and get a sense of their nonverbals. It's not true. That's not, what do they say? Like 80 to 90% of all communication is nonverbal. That's not true. But what is true is that 80 to 90-ish%, whatever that classic stat is, of the emotional impact of a message is nonverbal. And emotionality can tell us, in terms of our emotional reactions to other individuals, can tell us a lot about ourselves and a lot about them. So I really highly recommend doing that. I have kind of a 3-step process when it comes to identifying and then selecting target grad school supervisors. Because remember, there's only like 3 to 5 supervisors that you should apply for, particularly for doctoral degrees, to an extent master's degrees as well, depending on what kind of a master's degree it is. Right. So if you guys are ever interested in learning anything like that, because we're basically, hey, Diego, because we're out of time for that one today, because I want to get to your guys' questions. Right. If you take a look, I just opened up some new slots here on my website. So my consultation website is www.drphoenixsingh.com. You guys can go ahead, look on there. If you're trying to figure out who a good supervisor for you would be, we literally can identify the supervisors together for you. And this is not only useful for people who want to apply to grad school this forthcoming cycle, which, to be honest with you, you need to do it yesterday, right? In terms of identifying these people, because you've got folks who already, my recommendation is a minimum of 2 years before you're actually applying to graduate school. You need to start identifying and then systematically developing personal relationships with your target supervisor. For me, it was the end of freshman year that I figured out where exactly I wanted to go and who my target supervisors were. So if you've got super nerds like me applying to programs like I applied to, where the acceptance rate, no joke, was 0.2%. So there are 500 applicants and 1 spot, right, for a fully funded 7-year double doctorate, right? If that's the kind of thing you want to go into, you have got to get a jump on the competition. So make sure that you contact me via the website there. We can get a session together for us, right? If there's no times and dates that work for you on there, again, just send me an email, okay? And we'll find a date and time to be able to book a session together, right? And we can kind of go through that. But again, if you are literally even in your freshman year and you know already you want to go to grad school, because I have a number of you now that I'm mentoring, which is awesome. And if you guys are in the room, hello, great to see you guys, right? Who I'm mentoring from their freshman year all the way through. And that's the entire game plan for you guys, which is awesome. Okay, so let me go ahead, guys. I'm going to start answering your questions here for the second half an hour of today. Get a drink real quick. So feel free to ask your questions, okay? Okay, so awesome, Charles. Thanks, buddy, for fleshing this out a bit more. So Charles asked, does your institution's assistantship stack onto a Fulbright? So, for example, 2 salaries. So Charles, I had asked for grad school or for what, and so Charles had said for grad school. So if you guys don't know what a Fulbright scholarship is, so I'm a Fulbright scholar. There's different levels of being a Fulbright scholar. Usually Fulbright scholarships will fund you going, and this is only for folks in the US, right? And so the idea is that essentially they're going to pay for you to go internationally to be able to go to grad school somewhere, right? And this can be for a master's degree, it can be for a doctoral degree, and you're going to go there, right, and kind of be an ambassador essentially for the United States, almost like a student level ambassador, right, be it if you are going to grad school or doing your postdoc, and then you've got something called senior Fulbright fellows or senior Fulbright scholars, which is what I am, which is where I got paid as a professor to go and move over to Israel. And while I was over at Israel, I was a law faculty member. Who on earth would let me be a law professor? I don't know, but I appreciated the opportunity. I love Israel, and I had a wonderful experience there at the University of Haifa. Shout out to Rabia Asi, who was my sponsor. God bless. And so essentially, Charles, a great question. So it shouldn't be assumed that these things are essentially going to stack. The idea is that the university that you're going to be applying to go to graduate school for, the big benefit for them is that they don't have to fund you because you're already getting funding. But that does not mean that certain ancillary things that you can do as a graduate student won't still earn you more money. So, for example, being like a graduate assistant, a teacher's assistant, like a GA or a TA, no longer. Somebody asked me the other day on the channel, there was a comment asking me about, like being an RA, but obviously like a research assistant. If you're going into any kind of a master's or doctoral program where research is involved, let's say you're going to do master's thesis or a doctoral, thesis, i.e. a doctoral dissertation, then it's something where there's really no such thing. Certainly it's like a paid research assistantship, right? And of course, you can always get kind of part-time jobs outside of academia and this kind of stuff if you wanted to. Just, I don't recommend getting a full-time job and doing school full-time. That's really, really difficult, okay? So Charles says, yeah, research assistantship, and then you win a Fulbright. Sorry, just saying everything, but yeah. So Charles, sometimes I want you to keep in mind for whatever the target programs are, take a look at whether or not any of those also have the opportunity to give you scholarships. Example, when I applied to the double doctoral program in University of Minnesota, even though I didn't end up going there, I was just super lucky to get that opportunity. What happened for me was there was something that was called like the Dove Scholarship or the Dove Fellowship. It was like a diversity thing or whatever, right? And I was super lucky that, I ended up winning that. And I think that gave me, I don't know, like $4,000 to $5,000 a year, like extra money, right? And that's stacked on top of the other opportunities that I already got. But that's a great question to be able to ask. Obviously, in terms of Fulbrights, I am much more familiar with kind of the senior Fulbright funding mechanism, but I do have 2 of you right now who are applying to the Marshall Scholarship and the Rhodes Scholarship. So if you guys ever want to talk about those, we can always talk about those more in a personal one-on-one session. So, okay, so Angel says, hey, Dr. Singh, I have a connection with a grad supervisor for a PhD program here in California. Awesome. He said that he could recommend and get me into the program. I'm a little worried, okay, because he's interested in the same general topic, but different aspects of a discipline. Should I still try to work with him, even if it's not exactly what I want to research? Honest answer, yes. Yes, you should. right? This doesn't have to be the only program you apply to, Angel, right? But if you have somebody who is willing to assist you in getting into a PhD program, it would be a crime, if nothing else, not to at least apply to the program, right? Now, keep in mind, and I don't know why it's not one of the most popular videos on this channel. It is one of the best videos on this channel, and it's called, I think it's called like the 5 biggest doctoral dissertation mistakes. Please watch that video, right? It is one of the best videos on this entire channel. So again, 5 doctoral dissertation mistakes. And one of the key things that I talk about in that video is that you are not going to do your most seminal research as a graduate student. Most of us have waited our whole lives to be able to get into grad school. And so because of that, it can be really scary or really frustrating. The idea that, we're going to go into grad school and then we can't do the exact kind of research that we want. The fact of the matter is that you may not get super lucky, given how hard it is to get into these programs, to have somebody doing the exact kind of research you want. And even if you do, especially if they're at an R1 university where they're getting funded to be able to do certain projects, you will be working on those projects. And if they kind of finish one funding mechanism, all of a sudden they get a new grant on something slightly different, you're going to be doing research on that slightly different thing. Remember what I always say, right? Which is super lame, but also super true, which is that grad school supervisors, they want soldiers. They don't want other generals. And for people like I was in grad school, I was really egotistical in grad school. It was not a good look. I'm telling you right now. I really thought I knew everything. I was a bit of a dick. I mean, there's no other way to say it, right? And some of you guys may really sympathize with that, right? Maybe that's you too. And if it is, okay, right? And if it's not, then it's not. But if you're in that kind of a situation, you have to be really careful, because really what you should be doing in grad school is getting as much or acquiring as many skill sets as you can, right? So advanced analytic skill sets like statistical analytic skill sets, learning how to use different pieces of equipment. Maybe you want to learn how to use fMRI machines or positron emission tomography or diffuser tensor imaging or electron microscopes or, patch clamp technologies. Whatever it happens to be in your particular field, right? Or lasers. That's what I'm talking about, right? I wish we used more lasers in psychology. I feel like that would be very popular. Somebody, even if it doesn't do anything, I feel like people would go to laser psychology more than anything else. Like laser tag. It's basically just tag, but with lasers. And I feel like this would be very popular in terms of some sort of laser psych. Maybe we can all get together and make an accredited program, maybe a master's level program in laser psych. But, right, at the end of the day, that's the big thing. You will not necessarily be doing the kind of research that you want per se, but get the skill sets, because those are the skill sets that are transferable, right? Analytic methodologies, research methods in general, and publication, learning how to be able to publish, learning how to be able to get grants. These are the things to learn during graduate school, okay? And begin that process, developing your own research line or getting practical experience in the field so that you can explode out of graduate school. Thanks to you guys who are liking the video right now. Do me a favor if you haven't already and hit that thumbs up button. So, Angel, that's what I would recommend. I understand the fear. Trust me, I would be afraid too. But it's one of these things. There's a great saying that one of my camp counselors used to say, which was, feel the fear and do it anyway. Same thing on this one, man, right? It would be a crime not to apply. There is no need for you to tell that individual that you are applying to other programs as well. But you should also apply to other programs where maybe you perceive there to be a very good goodness of fit as well, especially if you like the person. And I want you to go to their CV and see if they have recently been publishing in the last 2 to 3 years with other grad students. That's a good sign, right? Especially if you want to go into academia or have the chance to be able to be a professor one day. It's a good thing to go into and to take a look at their CV, okay? So what else we got? So past to present, Youth Dilemma says, sir, how do I find a free course for grant writing, right? So grant writing, guys, is one of these skills where the good news is on YouTube, depending on the kind of field that you're in, like let's say that you're in some kind of medicine here in the US. If you take a look, National Institute of Health, they usually have, different sorts of, they won't have a full training, right? These trainings are usually expensive. You have to go to them for at least a half day. On Publication Academy, we've got a master class in grant seeking, a master class in grant proposal writing, and a master class in grant management after you successfully won a grant. I do recommend those 3 courses for obvious reasons, right? I helped to develop them. I built all the PowerPoint slides. Those things are the cat's pajamas. I highly recommend them. So that's publicationacademy.com. But if you want something that's going to kind of, wet your whistle, whet your appetite, make sure that you get a preliminary sense of kind of what to do, it's not going to be really comprehensive, but there will be kind of talks that have been given at conferences telling you the basic grant mechanisms, where online you can go, some general things about what program officers are looking for. And you can find those on the YouTube channels of these national organizations, right? And of course, depending on the country you're in, right, these things can change. So for example, let's say that you're in the UK and you want to get a Wellcome Trust grant, right? The Wellcome Trust, right? Or a Sane Trust grant, especially for behavioral health. Fantastic. Then you should take a look at their YouTube channels. In addition, there are entire YouTube channels that are dedicated to nothing but, grants, right? Grant funding. It may take a little bit of digging because it's not grant-specific training, like comprehensive training. That's something that you should expect to have to pay for. But in general, if that's what you're interested in getting into, then maybe that's a financial commitment or investment in yourself that you want to make as well, right? Okay, let's see. Bunch of questions here. So Portia, I think Portia's, sorry. So Junan says, my undergrad supervisor agreed to send me to an international conference. Oh, that's awesome. Junan, that's great. Don't have enough data yet, but I'm working hard to be able to get some data to be able to get a poster presentation down. Junan, that's freaking awesome. Love you. That's fantastic. Congratulations. Really, really good. Right. And again, remember, right, that if it's possible to do a paper presentation, do a paper presentation on a poster presentation. And remember, these days on the digital portal where you apply, sometimes there's a little checkbox, and the checkbox says something along the lines of, what is it? Like if your paper is not accepted, would you like this to be considered as a poster? Make sure that you tick that box and then you apply as a paper, right? There's no reason not to in that case. If you don't get accepted as a paper, they're not going to like ding you for a poster, okay? So that's what I would say. In terms of an international conference, if it's not a specific international conference, they're willing to send you to any, make sure that, again, for the love of God, find out who your target supervisors for grad school are going to be as soon as possible. Why? Because you need to take a look at their CV. You need to find out the conferences they go to. Everybody's got their pet conferences. I certainly did. And then go to those conferences, right? And meet those people and shake their hand if you have been double vaccinated and all this kind of stuff, right? Luckily now, a lot of conferences are no longer virtual, and they're announcing either for later this year or next year, they're actually going to be in person again. If you're a little bit introverted, I understand. A lot of people don't think that I'm introverted, but I am introverted in terms of where I get my energy from. It's mostly from spending time alone. But it's where I've learned over time to function effectively around large groups of people. It's a lot more comfortable for me to talk in front of 2,000 people than it is to have like 7 people I don't know, but they know each other, and to just like, be in a, little group conversation with other people. I'm sure some of you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? But that's the thing. If you get to choose what conference to go to, that's a great way to be able to pick it. On Publication Academy, we have a ton of modules about how to be able to build posters, and they all give templates and all this kind of good stuff. How to be able to write conference poster and conference paper abstracts, blah, 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 blah. Okay, there's a lot of great stuff on there. Check it out. So, okay, great. Let's see. So, Portia says, is your first something or Portia, I'm sorry. Oh, semester. Okay. Too early for an assistantship. So, Portia, do you mean your first semester of graduate school for a graduate assistantship, or do you mean your first semester of undergrad for like a research assistantship? You can tell me. Okay. So, cool. Here we go. Karen says, hi, Dr. Singh. Hey, Karen. Thank you for putting this on. While I was applying to SURF programs, that's right, I found probably about 20 supervisors I would like to work with. I applied to a number of institutions, but many of the supervisors were at the same schools. Okay. Same school is fine, provided it's at different programs, right? What do I mean by that? Let's say there's a PhD in clinical psychology and a PhD in criminology. Same university, that's fine. The people will never find out. The other people will never find out, right? Unless they like work one-on-one super close together. Outside of that, it won't happen, right? That's okay. Filing multiple applications for the same department, right? Not a good idea. Unless they are very clear on their website, or they've even told you somehow that they co-supervise with somebody else in the department. So when I applied to UPenn, there were two people that I really was passionate about working with, and they were happy to kind of co-supervise me. So that was perfect, right? That worked for me. But to be honest with you, that is much more the exception than the rule. Okay. So Kieran says they employed various methodologies, but having not worked with any particular methodology, I'm not sure which one I would actually prefer. Kieran, that makes perfect sense. I totally understand that. When it comes time to applying to actual grad school programs, do you just kind of pick some of them? It's a good question. So Kieran, what I want you to do is to be able to go back through the last 3 to 5 years of both of the individuals. Again, this is why you only apply to 3 to 5 programs. Right. I want you to go through the individuals at the same universities that you're thinking of applying to, go through their CVs and identify in the last 3 to 5 years any papers, whether the first author or the senior author. Usually senior author depends on the field, but usually the senior author is the final author, okay, on the list, especially behavioral health fields. Okay, so that is super important. Why? Because those are the articles or the book chapters or the white papers or the government reports that they're most involved with and most passionate about that kind of work. And I want you to take a look here about their writing style, take a look at the impact factors of the journals that they're publishing in. I want you to take a look at the variety of methodologies that they employ. Are they collaborating with a lot of individuals at different universities? Are they going out and presenting and leading international conferences of repute within that field? And so forth. Take a look again on YouTube podcasts, get a sense of their personalities. This is the thing to do to be able to narrow it down, right? Do your best to narrow it down to one individual kind of within a department, max 2 individuals. And then at the end of the day, you'll just have to pick one again, unless they somehow entertain co-supervision, which again is the exception and not the rule. Okay, cool. So Charles got back to me and says, presidential assistantship, cool, for my home institution, but I want to apply for the Fulbright too. Okay, gotcha, man. So usually, Charles, in terms of for the Fulbright, so are you saying that, so I'm just trying to understand, Charles, right? So you want to do the Fulbright. So like, let's just say, right, you're at UCLA right now, right? So University of California, Los Angeles in the US, right? So UCLA, and you want to apply to go to Cambridge, let's just say, okay. So let's just say that's it, right? So you wouldn't hold both positions simultaneously, right? So what would end up happening is that you wouldn't have that home institution and then also have this graduate kind of institution. The boomeranging around in terms of, Fulbrights, unless you're doing some kind of like a sabbatical, so you're kind of like deferring and then you're coming back. If that's the case, then of course the home institution isn't going to pay anything. I thought you meant that you're going to get accepted someplace internationally and to like a regular grad program where maybe they'd give you a stipend. And on top of that, you want to apply for the Fulbright also at that international university. That's what I had assumed you were talking about. So if it's something where you have a home university and then you're applying for the Fulbright somewhere else, the stacking wouldn't be a thing. So, okay. So going back to Portia real quick. So Portia had asked and she's clarified for me. She said, is your first semester early for an assistantship? And I asked, are we talking about undergrad or grad school? Portia said graduate school, right? So honestly, Portia, if you can get it, I would say rock it. My recommendation is just to understand that oftentimes if you want to, be a graduate assistant, you're going to have to kind of like sit through the class one time first, where somebody else is the GA or the TA or whatever they would call it at your institution, so that you kind of understand the inside workings of a particular course. Not always, but oftentimes. Oftentimes, just getting that opportunity because it's paid and people need to make money. Sometimes you'll have to essentially do it for some classes you're not overly passionate about, and then essentially you get kind of like moonlit, right? So you kind of like slide right in there in terms of graduate positions that you are kind of passionate. You're welcome, Karen. In terms of graduate positions that you are interested in or graduate classes you are, or undergrad in that case, classes that you are interested in being a GA for, but especially if it's your first semester, right? Then it's something where you can still apply for the positions, but particularly apply for GA positions for classes that you think people aren't going to want to be a GA for. So like in psych, it's usually like stats or research methods. People hate those, right? I love both of those things, but I didn't originally. I kind of had to fall in love with them over time, right? It was like an arranged marriage between myself and stats, as it were, right? But the arrangement worked, right? So that's what I got on that one. So awesome. No worries, Portia. Okay, guys, before I get going for today, I'm going to wait another 2 minutes. Does anybody else have any questions? Doesn't have to be about grad school. It can be literally about anything. Awesome. Thank you, Andre. You're the best. Awesome. Any other questions, guys? I will literally wait 2 minutes and then in complete awkward eye contact silence. I'm kidding. I won't do that, but I'll still wait for you guys for 2 minutes. I'll chill with Ocean until then. This is my Dr. Evil pose, except with an otter. I don't know if anybody remembers in Austin Powers, the greatest quote from Austin Powers for me was, it's calling Dr. Evil Mr. Evil. It's like Mr. Evil. And he's like, Dr. Evil. I didn't go to evil graduate school for 4 years to be called Mr. Evil. I still think that's hilarious. A little bit of grad school humor for you there, which I'm sure many of you can appreciate. Any questions, guys? Sorry, Andre. I right now don't do any free sessions. I used to do free consultation sessions. I literally now have had my editor go back through and remove the word. It literally removed the word free from videos, because the first year I did that, Andre, and some of the videos really kind of blew up. But the problem is that I literally was getting like at least 16 to 20 requests for free consults every single week, and I just couldn't do it. And so this is the reason now where I, only do these things. So Portia's saying, where are you situated now academically? Which university? So Portia, so at University of Cambridge Institute of Criminology. I just finished up my rounds at University of Pennsylvania. Okay, good question from Junan. And also Department of Psychology now at University of Konstanz. And then I work with professors in over 22 different countries on 6 continents. And I travel internationally to be able to give keynotes and these sorts of things. Got 2 new books coming out this year, which is going to be awesome. One book is from Springer, and the other one is from Routledge? It's not. No, it is. Yeah. And one is from Routledge. So anyways, that'll be great. Okay, so Junan's got questions here. So Junan says, should we call postdocs and research associates Dr. X? If they have their doctorate, always. If anybody has their doctorate, always call them Dr. whatever. And then they should, if you're at similar levels, they should be like, oh, don't be ridiculous. Please call me X, right? Like your first name, right? So like that's the idea. And this for me is like really, really important. If for people who are not doctors yet, who call me by my first name or by my middle name, it makes me very uncomfortable, right? To be honest with you, I don't mind at all being called Mr. or whatever. It's fine, right? But being called by my first or middle name, especially by undergraduates or by graduate students, makes me very uncomfortable. Right? When I don't know them. Now, if, of course, they talk to me in these things, with my discretion, I will say, oh, don't be ridiculous. Or in some context, it's really healthy for them to call you doctor, professor, whatever. And remember that depending on the university, so for example, if you're at Oxford, right, a person who is a professor, you call them professor, whatever. If they are not at that rank of professor and they're somewhere beneath it, you call them doctor, provided they have a doctorate. Why is this important? So for me, when I travel internationally, so for example, I gave talks in Australia and in South Africa right before the pandemic hit, right? And at those 2 keynotes, it was very clear that it was like professor, right? And professor is a higher status than just doctor in those countries in academia, right? In the US, professor and doctor is completely interchangeable. You don't have to worry about one or the other. It doesn't matter. Okay. But if somebody doesn't have a doctorate, let's say that they're an adjunct professor and they're a Mr. or Miss, it's fine, right? So Junan says, I always call professors doctor. Yeah, just make sure that you know first if that professor is actually at the top rank, right? It depends on the country you're in, right? Again, if it's like UK, don't call professors doctors and do not call doctors professors, because they may think that you're making fun of them. Why? How do I know this? Because I did it. Right? I used to get in trouble at Oxford all the time because I didn't know who was a doctor and who was a professor my first year. And then I got like reported to my supervisor a whole bunch of times because they were like, oh, you're so overly familiar with these people, asking them how their day is. And I'm like, I can't ask people, how are you? And apparently the answer is no, especially not if they're like a tippy top professor. Now, the funny thing about me is that I'm a tenured full professor, right? So being a tenured full professor, whatever, I don't care. You can call me doctor, you can call me mister, you can call me professor. It really doesn't matter. Remember that it's a terrible reason to go to grad school to get called doctor. That's ridiculous. And to be honest with you, it's super cool to get called doctor. Don't get me wrong, but the likelihood is exceptionally high. You will be called doctor twice in your life. The first time is the day that you get the doctorate and your family and friends are there and you get the hood or whatever it is and people will be like, hey, Dr. Singh. And then after that, you can only assume that you will be called doctor anytime you do something stupid. Like, for example, forgetting your passport when you go to the airport and your partner is just like, hey, Dr. Singh. Seriously? Okay. So it'll be sarcastic. That usually is like the only way that it ends up getting done. So, okay, cool. Let's see. Blah, 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 blah. Other questions before I finish it up. Awesome. Andre says, if I apply to a PsyD program online that is located in a different state, would my license only be valid in that area? Andre, that's a great question, right? You should make the assumption that if, let's say that it's in California and you live where I live, which is DC area, right? Then it's something where, you need to make the assumption that the program or whatever is basically, training you up and such to be able to make sure that you're going to fulfill all the license requirements for the state of California. And state of California is very unique. There are actually programs out in the state of California where you can get something like a PsyD, and the PsyD will not be accredited. It's not an APA accredited program, but it is accredited by the California Board for Psych. And because of that, you can actually practice, but only within the state of California. I just saw a program like that literally 3 days ago when I was doing a one-on-one consult session with somebody, and they brought a program like that to me, right? But remember, at the end of the day, after you end up, completing an APA accredited program and you end up doing one of the APPIC internship match kind of practica, then you'll end up taking the EPPP, and then all of a sudden, yay, you're a psychologist. You can get licensed, and you can get licensed in multiple states. Some states have kind of like an interchange, where if you're licensed in one state, it automatically will go to other states. I recommend taking a look out of all of the APA divisions. There's many dozens of them. APA being American Psychological Association in this case, not APA, American Psychiatric Association. I recommend for American Psychological Association taking a look at the website of the Clinical Psychology Division, and if you need additional help contacting someone who is there on the executive board, they should be able to help you out. Okay? So, awesome. Any last questions, guys? I got like 4.5 minutes, so I'm more than happy to answer anything, and those were some great questions. What else we got? Yeah, I wish there was more money. Yeah, for PsyD programs, for real, for real. Yeah, PsyD programs are crazy in terms of the amount of debt that you take on. Usually, it's anywhere between $100,000 to $250,000, which is like what? And funding opportunities are like minimal. Somebody asked me the other day about funding opportunities for PsyD programs. There are certain programs, they're super rare. It's like Baylor, for example, where it's like, you can't afford tuition, these things, like it'll be funded. But because of that, the acceptance rates are like, woo, super duper low, right? So it's just something to know about. So, okay. Tyrone says, I know how it feels. I knew my faculty advisor was Mrs. X for many years. Didn't know she was awarded the doctorate, and she was deeply offended. I felt so embarrassed. Tyrone, that's annoying, man. It's especially annoying because it's like, you get the doctorate. I promise, mate, that only happens for like a year or something. After that, anybody who's like really insisting on being called doctorate, the doctor or whatever, they got their own issues. Right. It would be something else if they're like, I don't know, like, let's say that it's a medical doctor. So I have a lot of medical doctors in my family. I'm the only psych person in my family. If somebody is like a client, they want to call me like my first name, then, that would be fine if it's within the context of like a session. But if it's something where, one of these people is my undergraduate students, I'd be like, whoa, no way. Right. But yeah, Tyrone, that's so funny. And plus, how would you know that she got the doctorate, right? Okay, that's good. Portia says here, do you have any advice on how to save money on textbooks? Rent them or resale. Those are the two best things, right, that you can do. Also, in some cases, you can get digital versions. And in some cases, you can get digital versions that you can rent, from a university library or from an external library. So that would be my recommendation on that one. That's a really difficult situation. Also, anybody who just finished a class, there are people who will finish classes. Like, for example, I remember when I finished my undergraduate behavioral stats class, which I wanted to forget about as fast as possible, says the guy who ended up being a stats professor. I wanted to get out of that class, and like the book, I was like, I'm never going to use this. And so because of that, somebody who was going to take the class the next semester asked me, can I buy it from you? And I just gave him like 25% off And so at the end of the day, that book, which is like $100, all of a sudden it was only $25 at the end of the day, which wasn't that bad, right? Just make sure that if you want to, resell textbooks, don't like do a lot of underlining and writing in the corners and highlighting stuff and all, which kind of stinks. Like that's how I learn best. I always take notes, underline this kind of stuff. That helps me out a ton. So excellent. All right, guys, I will go ahead and sign off for today. Make sure to hit that like button before you leave, please, because it helps out the channel a ton. Check out all the other videos. Again, would love it if you guys booked a session. I would love to be able to talk with you one-on-one. There is my website, which is drphoenixsingh.com. Again, I just opened up a bunch of slots. So over the next few weeks, you guys can take a look. I will be gone for a number of days at the end of this month, right? But before then, I'll try to get a couple more lives in, so save your questions up, right? And per usual, take a look at publicationacademy.com. If you guys need discounts and these sorts of things, for the love of God, just send me an email. Let me know. That stuff is way too expensive. So excellent. All right, guys, I appreciate you. I will talk to you soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.